A big hello to our parents in Asia. Welcome back to our Everything Boarding School video series. For first-time viewers, Everything Boarding School is a community outreach effort to bring the good news of boarding education to all corners of Asia. I'm your host, Daniel Sito. I'm an education consultant and founder and head of Sesame Education. We are conducting our interview today from Singapore, and the topic is how boarding education shaped and prepared me beyond just university. We're so delighted to have with us Miss Stella Joe, a boarding school alum and a former student of mine.
Hi.
Hello, Stella. It's so good to be in touch with you again after so many years. You have grown a lot. Last time we met, you were at St. Andrews, and now, lo and behold, you are now at Stanford. So, first of all, congratulations.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for coming to our midst today to share about your boarding school experience.
Of course, it's my pleasure.
And so to start off, would you like to share some of your cultural and educational backgrounds, like kind of like a quick rundown, from your childhood to now?
Yeah, for sure. So my name is Stella. I was born and raised in Shanghai, China, and I studied at a local school all the way from kindergarten till the end of middle school. And my academic journey in the US started in 9th grade, where I went to a boarding high school called St. Andrews School in Middletown, Delaware in the US at the age of 15 years old. And I spent 4 years in the boarding school, and I studied in University of Pennsylvania, where I concentrated in finance and minored in French. And right after college, I went straight into law school. So I'm currently pursuing my JD degree, and I'm a rising second-year student at Stanford Law.
Now, if we're just looking at that journey, I mean, I'll be curious. Would you like to share how you came in contact with the concept of boarding education and why America? And how did you and your parents eventually arrive at that decision that, we're going to apply?
I think I was first exposed to the concept of boarding school when I went to a summer program at a boarding school, actually, in the US during the summer of my 7th grade. I went to Mercersburg Academy. It's a boarding school in Pennsylvania. It was a 5-week-long summer program geared towards students who use English as their second language, so students like me. And I think in a lot of ways it simulated aspects of boarding school. For example, we lived with our peers in the summer program. We had a mandatory time carved out for sports every day. We all ate at the school dining hall, and we didn't really leave campus that much because the school was kind of in a suburban area in Pennsylvania. So it simulated really the boarding part of boarding school. And that was my first experience being at a boarding school. And I think in terms of why America, so I had a really good impression of American boarding schools after that. And I actually went on to go on a boarding school tour during the last year of my middle school, where I toured around 20 boarding schools in America. And at the time, I was primarily considering US, but I was also considering Canada just as a point of reference. And I think US primarily because, as I said, I went on that summer program, and to me, it was a very unique experience because I felt like I was taking on a more well-rounded identity than just being a student. When I was in the local school in Shanghai, I found myself really loving the extracurricular activities. Like I was leading the volleyball team, and I was writing the musicals every year, and I just really loved them. But I felt like I didn't have a chance to explore these things outside of the classroom and just being a student. But I felt like I had a lot more opportunities when I went to that summer program. I liked it even more after comparing it to boarding schools in Canada. I felt like there was more hand-holding in Canada. A lot of schools were from kindergarten to 12th grade, and they all wore uniforms, and it just felt like you're being sheltered a little. And I think personally, I just wanted to become more independent. I wanted to have more presence as a student on campus, and I want to be involved in more initiatives. And I felt like from my school tour and from my summer program, I was able to get that more in the US.
I think one of the things that parents in other parts of Asia can take away is that a very simple thing that they can do would be to send their child to a summer program in the States. And let the journey, let the experience speak for itself to see whether this is something that the child would enjoy.
Yeah, and not to mention that was actually my first experience in the US, so I've never been there before. And it was very low stakes and it was a lot of fun. And because it's a boarding school, I think the teenagers are still very well protected and you get exposed to a new culture, a lot of new friends. So I think it was a really amazing experience.
So I would say, I would even say that you should say thank you not only to your alma mater, St. Andrew's School in Delaware, but also to Mercersburg
Yeah,
for
for
kind of
sure.
stimulating you to that whole idea of boarding education. Now let's move on. For after your family decided that yes, we're in, we want to apply. Would you like to briefly describe that application journey, that process, that those few really intense few months that you went through, and of course that is an application, and so in the end it led you to the boarding school. But how did you benefit from the process itself? How did you yourself benefit? What did you learn from that application process about yourself, about things around you?
Yeah. So I would say aside from, during the standardized test, the application kind of can be broken down to two main areas. One is writing the application essays, and the other is actually doing the interviews with all the schools. And I think I can start off from writing the application essays. I think they gave me a really good opportunity to reflect on the things that I'm doing. I think all along when I was growing up, I kind of knew this is what I like to do, but I never thought about why, and I never thought about what their impact is on who I am as a person. And I remember in my application essays, I talked a lot about being on the school volleyball team and recruiting the musical cast and all of those extracurriculars that I loved. And from that, I think something that I distilled was I loved being in a community and I love cultivating smaller communities. And that's something that writing these essays helped me reflect on that I didn't realize when I was just doing these activities. And I think the same thing with interviews, they also gave me a chance to reflect. And I think more so, I think growing up, I was always comfortable talking about things, but not about myself. And I think that's
Mm,
especially because in Asian culture, I think humility is such a big
mm,
aspect of the culture that oftentimes we might even downplay the things that we've accomplished. But I think through the interview process, I learned to advocate for myself, to give a narrative for who I am, my passions, and the futures that I envision myself. So, in a way, I think I also kind of gained a voice through the interview process that I'm super thankful for. And I think also, aside from knowing that I love smaller communities, I think something else I learned about myself during the interview process more concretely was I discovered what language meant to me. Because a question that
mm,
I most frequently got was how I learned English and how did you grow to like English? And I remember
mm,
telling people about like growing up watching Harry Potter, pretending I'm Hermione Granger, like, talking to myself in the mirror using lines from the movie. And I think also from talking about my process of learning languages, I realized I loved it because to me it's so special to communicate with people in their local language. And at the same time, and
mm.
at that time, it was communicating with Americans in English. And I think that just established a more intimate connection than I ever could by translating things into Chinese or into a third
Mm.
language. So that's also something that I learned about myself. And I eventually minored in French in college, and I think I could I that I should have attributed to, I guess, also the interview process that made me realize how important language was to me.
It's kind of interesting, right? In life, how one one seemingly entirely unrelated event or incident can cause a life-changing kind of a pivot, right? If you hadn't
Yeah,
gone through that, maybe you might not end up majoring or partly majoring in French afterwards at
yeah.
uni.
I didn't minor in French until I got into college, and that was kind of sparked by something I did during interview process for boarding high school. So, yeah, just something I wanted to add.
Would you like to describe how St. Andrews life at St. Andrews School was like?
Yeah, definitely. So St. Andrews is located in Middletown, Delaware, which is a really suburban part of Delaware. It's a really small school. There are 300 people, 300 students in the whole school. And something really unique about it is that it's 100% boarding, which meant all
Mm.
students and faculties lived on campus. But while we only have very few people, the campus was huge. We had 2,200 acres in the entire campus,
Oh,
which
that's an
is
envy from me, like growing up in Hong Kong, 2,000 acres, right? That's not imaginable.
Yeah, I know. Same for me. Like when I was in local school in Shanghai, our whole school was just one building. But at St. Andrews, we had our own pond. So every spring season, when crew was a very big sport, a lot of students from other boarding schools in their crew team would come over and join St. Andrews in crew meets. And we had our
Mm.
own woods where the cross country team practices. So that's kind of an overview of what our school looked like. I would say a typical weekday is that you would get up around 7:30 to 8 o'clock. You eat breakfast before 8:20. Classes start at 8:30, and then we have 9 periods of around 45 minutes each day, but depending on your schedule, you might not have class for all of those periods. And lunch is
Mm.
usually from 12:30 to 1:30, and then at 4 o'clock, when classes end, everybody join a sports team. No matter what level you are, you all go to sports practice, sometimes away games with other schools. And then after sports period, dinner is from like 5:30 to 6:30, and then you have some free time. And then we have study hall where you basically do your homework, preview for the next day from 8 to 10 p.m. And then we have some downtime, dorm functions, and it's bedtime. So that's what a typical day looks like at St. Andrews. Um, and so also several other unique aspects that I wanted to highlight was first, we had a no phone rule, which at the
Mm.
time I thought was really daunting because what am I going to do without my phone? How do I talk to my parents? But I think it ended up being really great because it really fostered a lot of face-to-face interaction, and because
Mm.
everybody lived on campus, really all of your friends and even the adult images who are the teachers at boarding school lived around you, so you really didn't need to use your phone for anything. And the second unique aspect is that we had a lot of sit-down lunches and dinners,
Mm.
which meant you sit at a designated table that rotates every month. So it was a great chance to get to know people that you might not meet normally in classes, activities, or sports. And because that assignment rotates every month, you constantly get to know new people. And we share a family style meal, which was really wholesome. And then the third thing was we had all of our classes using what we call the Harkness table style, which is basically you
Mm.
sit around a large round table with a classroom of around 10 students for any class, English, math, really anything. And you really engage in the class by discussions and by participating in the discussion. So that's something that I thought was also really unique. And also, as I've mentioned, it's 100% boarding. So I think the end result of that is that we really lived in a very small, cohesive, and close knit community. And you know everyone and you say hi to everyone in the hallway.
That's so good. And looking back in those years, what did you find as most memorable? From all the things that you had experienced.
It's really hard to choose just one, but if I have to say, I would think it's the school traditions. So, for example, we have a lot of silly traditions. So, for example, we do a square dance where
Mm.
at the start of every school year, where everyone dress in flannels and cowboy hats and cowboy boots and dance to country songs, and we invite a folk
Wow.
band to come play for us, and that take up a whole night. And then we have a Frosty Run where the whole school rolls out in school buses and pre-made shirts, and we go to Wendy's just for Frosty and just have fun. And we have a polar bear jump where we jump into a freezing cold pond the first day of winter just for jumping into the pond. Of course, there were more like, we had the arts weekend where basically it was a whole weekend where all the performance groups in the school was performing for parents, for grandparents, for other students at the school. So we had more serious traditions like that. But I think thinking back, the other traditions that I mentioned that were really memorable for me now seem a little quirky and goofy, but they are what tied the whole school together. And I think
Mm.
because of their silliness, the meaning of them doesn't come down so much on doing the thing itself, but more from being there with each other, being there with your friends. And I think that's what made it super memorable.
Through all those experiences, how did you see yourself grown and matured, during your time at St. Andrews?
I would say the first thing is I definitely learned how to time manage. And I
Mm.
think I was able to build really good both living and study habits because in boarding school, I had to juggle a lot of pieces of the puzzle that are in my daily life. I had classes, I had a lot of clubs, and the things I do for clubs can range from editing an article for the newspaper to organizing the annual prom. And I had sports every day, and sometimes we play games away at another school that could take up a couple of hours. But because I was at a boarding school from the age of 15 years old, I didn't have parents to handhold me. So I think I learned to figure out how to break down every day's time and how to make the best use of them on my own. So I would say time management is definitely something really important that I learned. And I think boarding school also helped me become more driven because I realized I wasn't just engaging in the community, but I was thinking about what impact I have on the environment that I'm in. So another
Mm.
example is I was very interested in biology when I was in boarding school. And in senior year, I took an advanced biology class. But I realized aside from that, I'm also interested in more nuanced areas like anatomy and physiology and cell biology. But because our boarding school was relatively smaller, there wasn't
Mhm.
an as nuanced curriculum. So I ended up connecting with a biology teacher that I was really close with. We drafted a mock syllabus for a new class called anatomy and physiology, and I proposed it to the headmaster and eventually got approved and it stayed in the course
Wow.
catalog until today. Um, so I think that's something that
So you
I,
made a permanent impact over there as
yeah,
well.
I completely just did it as an attempt, but I was super grateful that people actually took my suggestion and it stayed as a part of my legacy at the school, I guess. But I think I'm really not sure if that would be possible if I weren't at the boarding school because I think St. Andrews was a very equalized environment where students really
Mm.
have a voice and are empowered to drive change in the school community. And because it was such a small community, I think it was also easier to implement changes and to approve changes. And I would say one last thing is for me, from going through boarding school, I realized how important it was to create intimate connections with people and to foster close communities. Because when I first got in, I was afforded a lot of opportunities to engage on one on one conversations, and I lived with my
Mhm.
roommate in such close quarters. So, despite feeling like I've become more independent at the boarding school, I think I still had a really good support system and I had people to uplift and empower me. And when I was in senior year, I had a chance to pay it forward by becoming a senior on a freshman girls' dorm when I became
Mm.
the person who's organizing dorm functions, who's making the freshmen feel at home. And I think because I had such a good support system in the boarding school, I realized that it was always really important for me to have these connections and to foster closer communities, even when I've gone on to bigger places like Penn and even Stanford. So that's definitely also
Mm.
something that was impacted by being at a boarding school.
It's so heartwarming to hear those, those experiences. How that would, be life changing, right? It's
Yeah,
also so good to hear that, just one student who is interested in certain areas of biology can actually, you have the first of all, you have the courage, and the school also gave you that freedom and the respect to the student that they would actually listen to your idea of creating this mock syllabus about this new topic, and they actually later on would actually further to make that as a lasting or permanent part of the school curriculum as well. So it, it's rare. I mean, it's not common out here in Asia, and
yeah,
and this is something that is unique to boarding education. Now, if we look back at at those years, you went through so much, right, from grade 9 to grade 12. How did you, from now with this looking back, in what ways did you see that boarding school experience shape you to be what you are today? So focusing more on what you are now, and do you see any signs and trace of what you are now and certain aspects of what you are now was actually nurtured or planted, back in your days at St. Andrew?
I think if there is a theme for what I just talked about, it's probably community. And I think even nowadays, I still really love doing collaborative work. So right now at law school, going through final season every quarter, I still study. I love studying with friends. We form study groups where we ask each other questions, help each other with practice exams, and just really be an encouragement to each other throughout the really stressful exam process. So I think preferring working collaboratively rather than working on my own and helping other people through work and helping each other is definitely something that boarding school influenced me to do, because I was so used to being supported by others and supporting other people. I also gained the skill set of building a close relationship because I had so many opportunities of having one-on-one conversations with people at the boarding school and face-to-face interactions. And I think all of those interactions I was able to have in the boarding school in the first place taught me how to listen well, how to put myself in other people's shoes. And I think that became super helpful when it comes to, for example, this past summer when I was working at a law firm, it was very helpful for me to listen to clients that way and to build a connection with clients that way. So I think definitely the skills and my experience at the boarding school really carried over to college, to law school, and even to work as well.
Many parents in Asia, they would take a more academic look at their child's education, with an idea that, those years of preparation would serve only one purpose, and that's about university. Even if we take that narrow view, how would you comment on St. Andrew's ability to succeed in that one mission alone, which is as a college prep, as in terms of preparing its students for undergrad university?
Yeah, I think St. Andrews definitely helped me a lot. As I've mentioned before, I think one of the most important skills I've learned at St. Andrews was time management. And I think that became even more important for college because I was taking even more initiative to not only take the classes, but I had to figure out what major I wanted to concentrate in. And I had a lot of more chances to explore different opportunities, to explore the city or town around our college, because there are more opportunities to go outside of college. So I think there are even more pieces to the puzzle that you have to juggle in your everyday life in college. And I think that's definitely something that I was able to train myself to be very comfortable doing, in trusting my own judgment and to be familiar with the process of budgeting my own time. So that's definitely something that came in handy a lot when I'm going through final season in college, when the academics was even more rigorous than what I was in at boarding school. And I think this is something that perhaps differentiates me from my friends who went to big public schools for high school. That when I went into college, I felt a lot more proactive in reaching out to professors. I went to their office hours more early on, more frequently. I asked them questions via email, and I go to faculty lunches. And I think that's because in the boarding school, I was so close to my teachers, and I felt like I could communicate with them on an equal footing. So I think I was definitely less hesitant than my peers who went to these other big public schools and reaching out to the teachers, reaching out to my professors, and building a close connection with them in college. And I think in terms of academics and college experience as a whole, I was able to have a very systematic way of exploring many different areas and then narrowing down to a few areas that I'm interested in from my practice in boarding school. So for example, in my freshman year at St. Andrews, I tried out the environmental clubs. I tried out different sports like volleyball, dancing, squash. I was on the school newspaper. I was in the orchestra. And then I tried out all of those things, and then there are several things that stayed. For example, I ended up joining the jazz ensemble as a jazz pianist, even though I was trained as a classical pianist growing up. And I ended up leading the volleyball team and the tennis team. And I think that's really benefiting from the fact that there's so few people in the boarding school, but there's so many opportunities, to the extent I think there are more resources than there are people. So we definitely had easier access to clubs. Like I said, you can be any level in a certain sport and everyone gets to join a team. And you feel very comfortable even being a rookie and starting from ground zero. And there's so much time throughout the 4 years to slowly get better at what you're doing because there's so many resources for so few people. So I think having practiced that, like in college, I think it's even more so that you have to proactively seek out the opportunities on your own, and you want to explore as many things as possible when you're in freshman year, whether it be classes or clubs. And then you want to narrow down to several things that you can become more engaged in, or lead in the later years of your college career. And I think boarding school very well simulated what it would be like in college, but it was slightly lower stakes at a slightly smaller environment. So I think that helped me prep very well for how I was going to approach college as well.
And I'm curious to learn whether your latest career orientation, how did you come about this? And did St. Andrews School play any role of any sort in that?
I would say quite literally, because I'm currently at law school and my first exposure to the legal world was actually during my time at St. Andrews, where starting sophomore year in the winter quarter, I did mock trial as my sports substitute. I never had any experience in competitive mock trial or even things like Model UN, but I still joined and I stuck in the club for the next 3 years and found myself just really loving it. I love doing oral arguments in courts and working with clients. I realized law was a framework that I could use to view different issues and solve problems. And I just love thinking in frameworks. And I got to discover all of that when I was doing mock trial in high school. So I think the fact that you can just try out so many new things, like sometimes it pays off many years later, but I think quite literally, I think St. Andrews planted the seeds for later my decision to go to law school. I think looking forward to my future career, I think value or impact creation for the society is something that I would like to be baked into my career goal as well. And I want to do that through the lens of business. That mindset of I can drive change as well. And that's something that I want to do in my future career, but that's something that I first learned that I could do when I was in St. Andrews at boarding school.
It's so heartening to hear. I would like to take what you just said to a little bit further. I mean, let's imagine a what if scenario. What if you never taken that decision to go to boarding schools, right? You stay in China to continue to do what you were already doing at your school back then. Imagine what would your current life track would be like. What would you say?
I would say maybe tangibly there wouldn't be as much differences. I don't know if I would have still ended up at Penn, but as I've mentioned, my family was always considering, or my parents and I were always considering going to the US for college. So maybe going to boarding school only accelerated my plan. But I think there's incredible differences intangibly, because I think my role being in the boarding school was drastically different from that in China. Instead of just being a student who's sitting in the same classroom every day, I felt like I was a young adult who was an active part of the school community. And I think being at boarding school pushed me to be independent at a very young age. So I had a lot more faith in myself, in my capabilities. And I think I was more motivated because I already had the experience of being on my own and knowing what it meant to be in and contribute to a smaller community. So then I could implement the skill sets I've learned at boarding school to larger places. I think maybe if I really think hard, I'm not sure if I would have gone to law school, because right now I'm studying US law and I was born and raised in a completely foreign environment. And I think, and no family member in my family is a lawyer, so it's truly uncharted territory for us. But I think it's that courage of trying new things, doing something that no one in my family ever did, came from exploring the jazz ensemble, while I was being trained as a classical pianist or exploring mock trial when I was in boarding school. So I think how I perceive myself and the amount of faith that I have in myself right now, that probably wouldn't be the same if I haven't gone to law school or haven't gone to boarding school.
Thank you. Thank you. We're moving towards the end of our time together, so I just want to squeeze in one last question. What advice would you like to give to international students, especially from Asia, right? How to make the most of their boarding school opportunity? How would you advise parents who might be considering boarding education for their children, how to make that decision for their child?
I would say for students, the most important thing is just to explore as much as possible in the first 2 years. Especially take care to try the things that you've never done before. Maybe join the lacrosse team or participate in theater or even pick up a new instrument. I picked up violin when I was in sophomore year and I still play the violin a little, and I didn't think that I was going to learn something new when I was already 16, 17 years old. But you're going to realize later on that stakes become higher when you're in college and beyond. But boarding school cultivated such a safe place for you where you can start as a newbie and then grow throughout the 4 years. So definitely take advantage of that. But then while you're exploring as much as possible in the first few years, maybe narrow down to a few things that you'd like to focus on and be an expert at in later years. And because boarding school are such close-knit communities, you have a lot of opportunities at leadership as well. So definitely utilize that. And I would say second thing is to speak up, whether it be in class, in student organizations, or with your advisors and teachers. And I think that's especially important for Asian students. I definitely don't want to be grossly generalizing, but I think that humility and respect is such a big part of our culture that we tend to listen to others more, and maybe withhold our ideas a little. But I think a realization I had from boarding school was that everyone has a voice and you have the agency to drive change. And I think pitching in your thoughts services the whole community as well, because everyone's opinion matters and the best ideas are generated by pulling together everyone's ideas. So definitely speak up, say what's on your mind in the boarding school environment. And I would say the last thing is not only to make friends with your peers, but also become friends with your teachers. I think boarding school is such a unique place where faculty members are so present on campus and they're so involved in students' daily lives. So going to their office or going to their classroom and strike up a conversation or tell them what you're concerned about or what's new that's going on in your life, because they're not just teachers, but they're your mentors and advisors, and they're kind of your guardians at the boarding school when your parents aren't around. So you get to cultivate a really special relationship with them. And I personally still talk to my advisor to this day from St. Andrews, and he's given me so much invaluable advice, and he's been there to witness me going into college and going into law school. So I think that's definitely one of the most valuable relationships I have in my life, and I would definitely say be close to your teachers. A lot of times we aren't capable of visualizing the boundary of our capabilities. I think teenagers all have a lot of potential to try new things and meet new people, and we might not know that when we're living so close to home. And I would say really trust the boarding school environment, because personally I felt like it was really a home away from home for me. If you have already decided to go to boarding school, then in terms of prepping for that journey or prepping for the application, the most important thing is to start making reflections. Reflect on your hobbies, your favorite classes currently, and the changes in your upbringing. How did you grow up? And ask questions on everything. Why do you like the things that you do? What impact did your surroundings have on you? And what do you envision for your future self? And how would you describe yourself? Because so much of the application process is for you to give a narrative of who you are. And really the schools are assessing if you have thoughts about the meaning behind your experience and your identity. And the second thing I would say is just to go and learn about the boarding schools. Talk to people who are at boarding schools, go onto the website, or go on a tour. And I would say when you're looking at those information, the location of the boarding school doesn't really matter that much. Because it's such a close-knit community, you always focus on what's inside the school. And personally, I went to Middletown, Delaware, and I still had a fantastic experience. Look at the size of the school, because a smaller school means a closer community, but a bigger school might mean more opportunities. And so just the culture of the school also matters. So look at those aspects from their websites and try to learn before you apply to them. Those are the advice that I would give.
Thank you, and thank you again, Stella, for sharing with us your testimonial today. It is not only good to hear how boarding education has impacted you over the years, but also this sharing is going to be so useful for the communities out here in Asia, for parents to take reference from your experience and to make that decision for their child. And for that, I thank you all the more.
I just want to wish everyone the best of luck in your application process. It's going to be a great ride. Thank you so much.
To all viewers out there, if you have enjoyed what we shared today and would like to learn more from us, please like, share, and subscribe to stay connected on Everything Boarding School. Thank you all for watching, and until next time, happy boarding school hunting. Cheers.